So in this video, I'm just going to do a little bit of demo about how to layer darker watercolours over the top of your base. So in the video I did before, I did a little bit of a background, just something to start me off really. So that's all dry now, so I can paint kind of any of these areas without being worried that they're going to bleed or kind of spread into the others around them. So I'm going to clean my palette first because I've been using it, and that is really simple. You just want to take a brush. You can use the big or the smaller ones. A slightly bigger brush is probably easier. You can see that it doesn't take a lot of water really to kind of get those colours nice and clean. I normally just let the water kind of pool in this tray at the bottom, and then I just simply pour that in. Remember though, your water is obviously going to be part of your paint, so you use your water and you mix it together with the dried pigment on your palette. So obviously if your water becomes quite dirty, that's going to affect the colours on your painting, so make sure that you're just refreshing your water each time it gets dirty. So as I said, this is nice and dry now. One of the things that's really nice about watercolours is that you can layer darker ones over the top. So in a minute I'm going to be kind of adding a little bit more detail to this sky. But before I do that, I'm going to paint one of these areas here because I want to go back over it later. So if I do one of these now, I can let that dry and then I can be working into the sky. I'm going to paint this globe here. Now, because I want to have a kind of baby blue as a base layer, but I want dark green for these kind of land masses, I'm going to paint the baby blue and I'm going to let that dry, and then I'm going to go back over later with a darker shade. So I want a little bit of water. I'm going to use the bright blue. This time I think I'm going to mix it with the darker blue, and the more times I do that on the palette, the brighter the colours will become. But because I'd like a baby blue, I'm going to mix that in with the white. Obviously you can make colours paler just by simply adding a little bit more water, but this creates quite a nice colour. A little bit more, I think. Okay, and I'm just going to place that on the earth. Now, because I've mixed that darker blue in with it, it gives a slightly different hue, like a slightly different blue. I don't know if that comes out on the camera, but it looks quite nice on here. I'm going to rotate my paper so that my brush is always facing the outline, but actually following along in the same direction. It's really important. It does help massively if you make sure that you're always facing your brush to the line and then following along against it. Obviously when you're painting the centre of shapes, you don't need to worry about that. You can use your brush and you can just kind of blend the paint across that space. I'm going to change to a slightly bigger brush now because I'm doing inside that shape. I'm going to add a little bit more blue, a little bit more white. I'm just going to fill that earth. Now I'm going to pop a little bit of water in there because I want to get rid of those brush strokes. I'm going to use my brush on its side, and I want that colour to be a little bit paler than the background because I want it to stand out. Remove the excess on your brush, and I'm just going to smooth that over and then just finish off those last little bits at the bottom. But I'm going to leave that now, as I said, because I want to add some detail in the sky. I've got a blue and a purple here, and now obviously I've been inspired by Hundertwasser, so my sky isn't necessarily going to be realistic because Hundertwasser's artwork is abstract. So I'm going to have a nice bright red. I mean, obviously, you know, there are lots of different beautiful colours in sunsets, but you don't normally see a bright red. But that's fine because I am doing abstract art, and remember, abstract just means something that isn't realistic, and Hundertwasser's artwork definitely isn't realistic. Right, so I want a nice bright colour, but obviously because I want that to sit on top and I want to be able to see that, so I'm just going to paint that on, and that actually looks really nice. I'm happy with that. I'm happy with the intensity of the colour. I'm going to repeat that process. And I'm going to turn my paper because I want to have my brush facing that line, and I'm just going to very carefully bring that down to meet that. You don't want the paint so thick that it's sitting on top of a really thick layer, but obviously you do want it bright enough to be able to see. If the watercolour paint starts to become almost like a paste, you've probably got a little bit too much pigment. That's the hard paint that's dried inside the palette, and you're going to want to add a little bit more to it. You can see that that's quite watery, so that's quite a nice consistency. So I'm just going to paint a few more lines. Again, I'm following in the same direction. If you can paint nice and steadily and smoothly, you will get a more controlled, that just means a more neat finish. I could add some other colours in there, but some of them won't work. So what I can't do is I can't paint a yellow over this blue because a yellow is paler. So I'm going to give this a little bit of a yellow, and I'll show you what I mean. I can paint over the top and it will turn green because blue and yellow make green, but what I can't do is paint yellow over the top and create a yellow stripe. And hopefully I'll be able to show you what I mean. So if I paint this stripe in here, because the blue is sitting underneath, then when I layer the yellow on the top, it actually looks a little bit more green than it does yellow. So if I'd have wanted that stripe to be yellow, really I should have left it white and then painted it in afterwards. So as I said, you can paint colours on top of one another, but you just have to remember your colour theory and your colour mixing and what the colours will create. So I'm going to try and create a nice ombre effect in this fire, because I want it to be kind of yellow at the top, but I want it to be red inside here, and then like the orange and the yellow to kind of spread out like that. Now I'm going to start with my paler colour. You're always better off starting with paler colours when you watercolour. You don't want to start with your darker ones because you run the risk of them mixing with your lighter colours. So I'm just going to start by applying my yellow. It's a little bit watery at the moment, so I know I need a lot more pigment. So I'm going to move that around a few more times than I did before, and hopefully that colour will just become a little bit brighter. Let's have a go and see what that looks like. So that's a bit nicer. So you can put more than one layer of colour. So I could let this dry and I could layer another yellow on top, and that would help it to become a lot more brighter. But I don't want to overwork the area, so I just need to be careful about that. Remember, if you put too much paint on, or you oversaturate the area, should I say, or you move your brush too many times over that area, you will damage the paper. So I'd like to fade that now into a little bit of an orange. I think I'm going to add a little bit of gold in there as well, actually. So now I'm going to mix that gold and the yellow, and I'm going to put that just underneath there, because as I said, I want to create like a faded effect. So if I just add a little bit of water in between the yellow and the gold, that just nicely fades those two colours together. I'm going to start spinning that round now, just because I want to paint along those lines. It's really important that you remember to keep turning your paper. It's the best way of creating a nice controlled finish. Controlled just means neat. And again, around the side, so brush always facing the line and then pull it along in the same direction as the line. But I would like that to be orange, so when I faded those brush strokes out using a little bit of water, I'm now going to drop some orange. So that orange is right next to the blue, so be careful because that is going to affect your colour. So I'm just going to bring my water back over, and I'm just going to wash that a little bit before I start adding my orange. And I'm just going to pour that extra paint into, I mean, to be honest, that water probably could do the change. If yours looks like that, I would recommend refreshing it. So back to my orange. I'm going to drop a little bit here. Now you can see that that orange is what we call bleeding into the colour next to it. That simply just means mixing or spreading. Just a word that we use when we're talking about watercolours to describe that process. So you might want the colours to bleed into one another. So obviously, like I do here, I want that to fade. But if I was trying to paint an area next to this, so say for example that blue was still wet, and then I was trying to paint this kind of fire right next to it, those colours would all bleed together, and I wouldn't want that. So you just have to bear in mind, you just have to be careful. If you're not sure if an area is dry, just test it, just put your finger on it, and obviously if that's wet, just work on a different area if you're painting. Now I really like the way that that water is kind of swirling around. It's creating a really nice kind of fiery effect. So I'm not going to remove that excess. If I wanted to, I could use a dry brush, and I'll show you. So if I dry my brush and I just kind of put that on the fire there, you can see that it's sucked it up, so it's kind of transferred onto the brush. But as I said, I quite like that effect, so I'm going to let that kind of blend and swirl, because it kind of goes with what I'm trying to create. Now I'm going to add my red centre. Now I don't mind if the red blends or bleeds with the orange, especially because they're harmonious, so that will work. But letting some colours bleed into one another will just create a kind of slightly muddy effect. So I'm not worrying too much about the edges here. I am going to be still turning my paper, and then I'm just going to bring that fire across the bottom, fill that space in, add a tiny bit of water to get rid of those brush strokes, and I think I am going to just really subtly blend those edges. Right now you can see just there that red has started to escape into the orange. That's fine, that's what I wanted to happen, but hopefully you can see now what I meant about the importance of making sure one area is wet before putting another colour next to it, unless you are trying to achieve this effect. So again, I think that's really lovely, and I really like all the way the colours are kind of merging together. But obviously that's not going to be appropriate for everything, and it's not necessarily going to be what you want. So I'm going to go back to the earth now, and then I'm going to let that dry. So you can see it can be quite useful to work on different areas at once. This earth is completely dry now, so when I put my finger on it, there's no residue left on my finger, so I know that that is ready. I'm going to put a nice dark green on here, and I really want that to stand out. So I'm going to paint, so I'm going to move my brush around quite a lot of times. Okay, now that is creating a really nice colour, but it's actually a bit scratchy, so I've put a little bit more water on. I'm just using a small brush now, and I'm really only using the tip of the brush. So earlier on, when I was trying to create large areas, I would have more of the brush flat on the paper, but because I'm trying to do quite fiddly areas, I hold the brush more upright. So larger areas, as I said, use the brush on its side a little bit more. You know, as I said earlier, maybe use a bigger brush. If you are doing small, delicate areas, hold the brush slightly more upright, because you've got much more control. That means you're able to move it about more easily and manipulate it more successfully to paint within certain areas. A little tiny bit of water there. Okay, and you can see that that's layered on really nicely. It's actually even a little bit too dark, so I'm going to just take my larger brush and I'm going to soak a little bit of that off, because it's a bit too dark, and I actually think that that looks nicer. So when you're using watercolours, you're not necessarily trying to create those really kind of dark, opaque colours. That's more what you'd use acrylics for. The beauty of watercolours can often be their subtlety. So I actually think that looks a little bit nicer. So yeah, there you go. That's how to layer.